Hey everyone, welcome to another Tutorial Tuesday. Today I'm going to talk about the assert macro. I talked about this in a previous video, my 10 Commandments video, where I said assert everything, and I'm right. You know, that's the thing you want to do. It's free, it's nice, simple error checking. For anything that you're sure is going to be some particular value, it's good to assert it. I hate the assert macro, absolutely hate it. I think it is a very kind of garbage implementation, in my opinion, at least for my own uses. And there's a number of reasons why. It's worth noting that I'm specifically talking about Microsoft Visual Studio's implementation. GCC and Clang may have very similar problems. I don't know. I haven't really used them. When I started using GCC and Clang, I had already written my own assert macro that does the things that I want. So why is assert bad? Well, there's a bunch of different reasons, and I think it's easiest to show those reasons in some kind of demo, like quick demo, just to show what this looks like. So first you have to include assert.h. That's fine. And it looks something like this, right? So you have something like x equals, 100, and then you do assert x is equal to 100, right? And so what this is going to do is nothing. That's the hope, right? So if I run this, then I've got, hello world, that's it. Everything works because x is equal to 100, so this assertion is true and life is good. However, if I make this assertion false, now I'm going to get an error. My first problem is here. The nature of the error that you get is sort of useless. And I don't know a super easy way to make this perfectly cross-platform, but let's take a look. So this is what happens. First, to standard error, I get the actual error message, assertion failed, and then the assertion, and then some, my file and line number. That's reasonable. It's not ideal, but I can't really fault them for it because, what are you going to do? You don't have anything except the standard error stream, the C error stream. This is where I start having issues, right? Microsoft Visual C++ runtime library, debug error, scratch.exe, abort has been called. You're screwed. Press retry to debug the application. Let's do that. That sounds fun. Well, here we are in, hey, I don't have the PDB loaded. Disassembly is going to be useless. My call stack is useless, right? It's not anywhere in my code. It crashes. Essentially, if you actually look at the disassembly here, what is actually dying on is literally a breakpoint has been triggered. It even says here, scratch has triggered a breakpoint. Here's my breakpoint, int3. In assembly language is interrupt3, and interrupt3 is the debug breakpoint. So if you set a breakpoint in debug mode anywhere, right, it's going to inject this little piece of code. So, that's not useful. My program is long gone, basically. I mean, the executable is still there, but I'm not inside of the call to main. I don't think I can actually expand any of this stuff. This is all external stuff, but so it's like this is not useful. I can't just debug this. My program is dead. So even worse, and this is where it really comes into play, what if this were some important thing of wow, x should never be 100. How could x possibly be 100? It would be super cool if I was sitting at the breakpoint, at this exact line of code with my breakpoint, and being able to say, okay, so I know that x can't be 100. Let me dig into the other external variables and see, I know x is calculated from something. Let me see if some, input happened wrong. And you're in a debugger where you can look at things. Here I can't look at anything. X is long gone. Main is dead, so x has already been cleaned up. This variable doesn't exist. So that's useless. I can't do anything with this. So what I have to do is I have to close the program. I have to set my breakpoint here. I have to do this. But unfortunately, I can't do anything here either because maybe it succeeds this time, right? So, it might be a very rare breakpoint or a very rare assert that fires, once every 10,000 times in a function that's called 100 times a frame or something. It's hard to do that. So I can set a conditional breakpoint or I can, set up the code. But conditional breakpoints are only going to work if it's, simple primitives, right? What if this is a string? What if I have string, I guess y equals, whatever. And I'm like, hey, this should never be foo. Now, assert can track that, right? I could say here, assert y is not equal to foo. This is perfectly valid. right? But I can't set a breakpoint on that. I can't do a conditional breakpoint on that because not equals is not a primitive C++ thing. It's an overloaded function that standard string overloads. So it's a function call that it's not going to be able to do in a conditional breakpoint easily. So now what I have to do is I have to do if y is equal to foo, right? Then I have to go in here and I have to do some kind of like, whatever. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll just literally do int, triple underscore equals, 0 or something. Like, it doesn't matter what I do here because I'm just trying to set a breakpoint. So now I've had to make a code change and, good luck if it's in some really crazy template thing. In my own engine, luavar.h is not a file that you want to change. It's hundreds of lines of code and there's a lot of, complicated stuff going there, but it's all templates. So you don't really want to have to make those changes because all the logic's in the header file and it's included everywhere. So that's useless, right? I can't debug that. I can't do anything with that. Okay. Let's keep going. Here's the other thing, right? One of the wonderful things about assert is they're free in release mode. Or are they? Let's go to release mode. Let's compile. Literally, now watch what happens. Literally all I'm doing is hitting Control F5. Control F5 will run my program without attaching the debugger or anything. It just runs the program, runs the exe. Ready? There's my error. Program crashes. Also useless. Because now what's happening is I am running the assert in release mode. It's not free anymore. Okay, so this is actually a thing. In Microsoft's Visual Studio implementation has an underscore debug. If I'm in debug mode, this macro will be defined. It's not defined now, that's why it's orange. But if I do this, it will turn purple, which is my macro color. So in debug mode, it is defined. So I can do things like if def debug, some kind of code or whatever. End if, right? And obviously this is not code that's going to do anything, but in release mode, this program will compile because this doesn't exist at all, right? So life is good. Now this is Microsoft only. The C runtime, like C ISO standard, does define another one called ndebug. Ndebug is defined never, as far as I can tell. I don't think it's ever actually defined. It is used. And if I dig through here, you can see debug versus ndebug. I pulled up the Stack Overflow one because it talks about, first of all, like this person, Adrian, it looks like, is 100% correct. Generally, it's better to rely on things like ndebug because it's standard behavior. And yeah, like this person also responds, yes, the ndebug, which is not debug, for C8 since C89, like it's been in the standard. Underscore debug is not in any standard. But it's not ever actually defined anywhere. Ndebug is never defined, as far as I can tell. It is used, however. So I'm just going to F12. Oh, apparently I'm not. I'm going to, well, let's kill this. Maybe I have to actually open it this way. Cool. Can't find this. Let me do debug and build. Try it again. There we go. I just had to do that. Had to try harder. Let's look at, this is the entire definition for assert. Here it is. It undefines assert and it says, hey, if ndebug is defined, define assert as nothing. Just void. Otherwise, do all this sort of complicated stuff. It declares a function called wassert with all the things, and then it basically like passes that stuff in, calling it if it's with the super fun double not expression, which is my very favorite sort of pseudo operator in C++ or in C. But here it is, right? Now the problem is, even in release mode, ndebug is not here. And that's sort of the annoying thing. You have to define it yourself. Which is super fun because now, okay, so what am I going to do? Right now it's never defined. I feel like at some point Visual Studio did define ndebug for release mode. So I can right click on this. I'll zoom this in for fun. And I can go to preprocessor and I can make sure that this is set to release. on all platforms. And I can myself define it. I can say ndebug. So now it's defined for all release platforms, or for all platforms for release mode. Now this should be free. Now it should not exist at all. I should be able to build this. It built. I should run it. Everything's good. So wow, I just went through a whole bunch of stuff just to like dig through all of this kind of stuff. So this is, I don't know. I hate the assert macro. I hate it. Even in debug mode, right? Like this is just not useful. It's just not useful to me. Okay, so what do we do about it? Well, what I think we should do is not use assert at all. We should define our own assert. And defining our own assert, there's lots of ways to do it. The basic idea is that somewhere on the compiler side of things, I think you're still going to be beholden to this if def ndebug thing. There's no real way around that. You're still beholden to that, and you still have to define that somewhere in your compiler settings or whatever makes sense. This has to be defined for release mode, because that's just not a standard thing across all compilers in terms of how do you define that. So I am going to define it myself. Like I'm going to do what you saw me do and just leave it defined there. That's not a thing that we're going to really be able to get around. So in terms of assert, in my own project I call it check for whatever it's worth. And we can kind of just follow the same type of basic logic. So we can say pound define, and you can call it whatever you want, assert or whatever you want. I call it check. That's what it is in my own projects. I don't even remember where that came from. It's been like 10 years. But that's just what it's been. Expression. Some things that I've worked with also define one that has an error message. That's also reasonable. I don't, but I probably should. And then we can even just look at the old assert macro, right? Just the void 0 type thing here. Else and if. And then here it's the same type of thing, right? Define check expression. So this is the expression that we're checking. And then we're just going to follow the same, basic idea, right? But you would say something like, void check implementation or something like that. And then this would take in some string, which is like message, and it might take in the other stuff that you would want, which is file name, and then it probably takes in, maybe I'll just do it as an int, line number. And so inside of this, it doesn't like my spacing, there we go. So here we would do check implementation, we would stringize this guy, and then we would pass in file, and we would pass in line, and we just call it like that. I probably wouldn't want to put that there. And so then in here we can do whatever we want, right? We can say maybe we do want to do standard error, and we'd print out, message or whatever. Maybe we're okay with including, string or something, so that we can kind of do some of this, so we don't have to do like weird concatenation stuff. Like we can just do some allocation here. I wouldn't totally recommend this because now we're doing allocations, which can throw other errors and so on. But, for simplicity, this is fine. So we would do something like, message, and then, message plus equals, something like this. Right, and you kind of have to build it like this, which is sort of annoying. And then maybe file name, right? Like you could do all sorts of stuff, or maybe I would just do this. Here, let's do this. Yeah, this is fine. And then so here, then then message plus equals what is it? To string. Line something like this, right? So now we have our like error message, and then we dump it out to a standard error. We can do this kind of thing. So this will let us at least print out this particular message. Now, the real thing that we want to do here is we want to figure out, setting breakpoints, all that kind of stuff. There's a bunch of different ways to do it. The super platform dependent way is to just throw out an assembly language instruction exactly like what we had before. I would generally not recommend this. What I would actually probably do is, and what I actually do in my own projects, is I would set in a thing that is like break to debugger or something like that. And so break into debugger, there's a bunch of different ways to sort of do that one. But it all just sort of depends on the platform and all of that kind of stuff. Windows actually has a debug break function. For instance, I can just call this. I think I have to do some extern thing. So there's a bunch of different ways to kind of dig into this sort of thing. But it'd be nice to set our own sort of breakpoint. So let's do that. Setting our own sort of breakpoint. Literally, I'm going to do this sort of thing. So it's going to look something like this. So in Windows, basically, if MSC ver is defined, I sort of do this external debug break, like I just, sort of forward declare this and then call it. Here's my macro. On non-Windows, right, if I have one of these other things, I force sort of an assembly language instruction to do this kind of thing. I don't know if this works on every single platform here. I've built on Mac, and this works on Mac. This is another sort of thing. I stole some of this stuff from SDL. If you look at SDL, which is an open source tool for like graphics and basically stuff like that, like it's just a very simple game library. I pulled much of this code from their SDL assert.h. What I used to do before is I used to literally just do the int 32 or the int 3 thing that, I started typing down here, right? Just this. This is what I used to do. I just had this. But this, I think, is at least a bit more cross-platform. So anyway, you want to rip this stuff into some cross-platform things so you can actually break into the debugger and do something useful. So now I have break into debugger, which does literally nothing in release mode, or in release mode, right? It does literally nothing if ndebug is defined. So that's pretty cool. I can put this anywhere I want in that particular case. And then here we've got this. And in debug mode, I don't care that much about being cross-platform. I'm not super worried about it. Okay, so now we have something that's like a bit better. So now I can replace this assert with my check macro. And I can sort of compile this, and we'll see if this actually works. Okay, it does. And I can run this, and I can hit, hey, it triggered a breakpoint. And standard error is probably here. Oh, it didn't. Oh, yeah, there it is. That's my assertion, error. I could probably make that less terrible. It just says x is not equal to 100. But here, I'm at a breakpoint. I'm at a breakpoint in this function, which is not super useful, but I can step out one, and here I am. Okay, what's x? It's 100. There it is. Now I have something useful, right? So this is like super, super, super simple, right? I mean, this is just, I've done basically no work here. I want to show you, if there's interest, I can show you like a deeper system for how to do this and kind of how I handle it on my own systems. But this is just a simple thing. So I just want to show you how this could look. Let's actually go here into the main loop or something. I don't know. And I'm going to say bool x equals false. Check x, right? Kind of the same thing. Oops. I'm in debug mode. You can't really see it here, but I'm in debug mode. And I'll build this guy, and we'll run it. And there's my assert. So I get it in my console window in red. I get, hey, here's the error. X. That's my error. It's whatever the assertion is. It's in a function called main loop. It's here in main.cbp, and it's on line 54. Also, I have this guy, which is my debug error. If I hit ignore, if I hit retry, what's going to happen is it's going to happily ignore the error in this one instance. So if I hit retry, it ignores it. Now I got a single frame, so this is the actual game itself. I got into the game itself, and I got a single frame because it's just at the top of my main loop. So this gets called every frame, right? And I can just do it, and I'm gonna get it every single frame, right? Every frame I'm gonna get this thing, and I get a new error as I go down. So maybe that's not what I want. Maybe what I actually want is I want to ignore this error so that I never ever ever get it again. Now I'll never get it, and I can go and do, I can draw walls or whatever. So, and then obviously if I run it again, then I will get the error again. So it's really convenient to be able to just say, I don't care about this error, or, I got this once, I want to keep getting this error. Then I can also abort, and if I hit abort, I'm here. So this is in the error code, basically. Here's my break into debugger that we saw before, and I'm here. So if I hit Shift F11, so if I step out of this function, and I've actually just trained myself to step out twice. If I step out twice, I'm at the actual X right here. Here I am. I can hit this, I can look at whatever. This works on PC and it works on Mac. I don't know if it works on anything else because I haven't tested it on anything else, but theoretically it should. There are some issues, some constraints. Issue number one is I have to be able to show a dialog box. So you have to have, there's operating system specific code that has to happen. This is why it's never really going to work as part of the C runtime. There has to be some kind of operating system specific code to throw up a dialog box, to care what that dialog box says, and so on. So, that's it. That's what I wanted to show and kind of talk about why I hate, typical assert. And so you can see this is all OS specific crap, right? This is all, if I dig in deep into this stuff, os.message.show, this guy right here specifically is, like for Windows, like it's like Windows specific stuff like message box. There it is. So my point being that you do have to get into some of the like operating system specific garbage if you're going to do this kind of stuff. But I think it's worth it. And at the very least, if you're not going to get into any of this kind of stuff, you can, where is it? Scratch. You can at least make macro less bad, right? Like you can at least allow it to break into the debugger or whatever. And there is still, OS specific stuff to make that work. But again, in debug mode, I'm sort of okay with that, right? I mean, I never throw these dialog boxes up in anything except debug mode. So what does it matter? Who cares? And if it's something that the user will ever see, then it goes into the game UI. So yeah, I hate assert. I wrote my own. It's better and works well for me and has a lot of extra sort of bells and whistles that I really like. It ties into a whole larger error system that I've created that's, relatively significant. I mean, it's 380 plus 180, so, 500 something lines of code. If there's interest, I'm happy to go into how this works. Let me know in the comments and stuff below. But yeah, that's it. Thanks for tuning in, and let me know what you think.